Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the forum for this district. I particularly want to thank the Mount Airy Senior Center for hosting it this evening. I want to thank the Carroll County Times for promoting so well the forums, and the Community Media Center, who have gone above and beyond the call of duty, and WTTR for being active in helping and making election information available. My name is Claudia Lewis. I am the president of the Carroll County League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters was formed in the 1920s, about the same time, as an outgrowth of the fact that women had the right to vote. They have a mission to improve our government and to engage citizens in the decisions that impact their lives. The League works directly by encouraging voter turnout and by advocacy through the positions taken by study and building of consensus within the League. We do that on national questions as well as local and state level questions. League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. It's a political organization that encourages informed, active participation, works to increase understanding of important public policies, and what could be more important than our commissioners. Tonight, we're going to hear from the candidates that are vying for this district. Ms. Carol Blackburn, who's active in the community and is also a member of the Carroll County League and the State Maryland League, will be serving as our moderator. I'd like to tell you that it is entirely possible, for the number of questions that have come in, that we will not get through all the questions here, but we do feel that you should have the answers to those questions. So what we have done is that I will send each of the commissioner candidates a list of the questions that we do not get through. They can answer those questions, and they will be posted on the Community Media Center website. So if you go to Commissioner Rothschild's page, you can see his answers to the questions that were broached by the audience this evening. So Carol Blackburn will be introducing our candidates, explaining a little bit about our rules, and we'll get the questions started. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Claudia, very much. Candidates, I did do it too close. Candidates, welcome, and welcome everybody here. I'd like to introduce our candidates. Barbara Joan Biller is candidate for Republican for District 4. Richard Rothschild, Republican for District 4, and Sean Schaefer, Republican for District 4. Each of the candidates will have, you can't hear me? No? Now? Not coming? I have a really loud voice. If you want me just to yell, I'll be glad to. Thank you. Each of the candidates will have 3 minutes to give us sort of an intro of who they are, what they want to say, or if there's some topic that they just really, are feeling strongly about, if they want to do it. And then they'll have 3 minutes, and then we'll go into the questions, and there we'll have, they'll get 2 minutes to answer those questions, and when we're done with all the questions, we'll have a wrap-up for them. So, Ms. Biller, how about if we start with you?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, good evening. I'm Barbara Biller, Republican candidate for County Commissioner for District 4. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting the forum and Community Media Center for videotaping so that voters that couldn't be here could also watch. I hope this is a good opportunity for you to get a little bit better idea of who I am and how I may be distinctly different from the other candidates for the office, because you're a voter and you need to make a choice on June 24th, and I strongly encourage you to come out and vote. I think what you'll find is I'm a listener, and I like to exchange ideas with people. I don't talk at them, I don't talk to them, I don't have a one-way conversation, it's a two-way conversation. I have effective board experience from Carroll Community College Board of Trustees, the county's Economic Development Commission, which has taught me how an effective board operates. I will focus on local issues because I feel like that is the role and responsibility of the county commissioner. I have a community agenda, not a personal agenda, and I've truly enjoyed coming down into Mount Airy, going to New Windsor, going to Union Bridge, and talking to people and asking them, what do you feel are the most important issues in the community? I have evidence of leadership, and that is not driving people to follow. That is people willing to work with me and achieve results. And I encourage you to ask people, so what was it like working with Barbara Biller while she was a board of trustees for the Carroll Community College? I've been a board of trustee member since 2004 during times of increasing enrollment and challenging funding issues. So I learned how to balance priorities in funding. Ask them how it was working with me on the Carroll County Economic Development Commission when we approached difficult, challenging issues, tried to gather information, get the best information that we could at the time, and make sound recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. Ask them how it was working with me while I advocated for the Carroll County Public School System, encouraging Project Lead the Way to be brought to Carroll Public School System, creating mentorships, internships. So I, like you, have been a volunteer in the community for over 20 years, and now I feel that it's time to take a more leadership role, and I'm willing to work for you as County Commissioner. Thank you.
Mr. Rochelle.
Good evening. Candidates talk about better, more effective government. Better at what? Taxing rain? Regulating us? I'm Commissioner Richard Rothschild. I hold an MBA and a Bachelor in Engineering degree, and I believe the solution is less government. Our citizens are fed up with officials that talk conservative to get into office and then spend like liberals. Government's job is to defend your God-given rights of life, liberty, and property. Annapolis has been attacking our farms, our property rights, our gun rights, our pocketbooks because we let them. I've proven under fire that I have the conviction to actually stand and defend your freedom, and I will continue that defense if you choose to vote for me again. That's why I wrote the Second Amendment Preservation Resolution. It prohibited the use of your tax dollars to enforce O'Malley's bad gun laws in Carroll County, and it was the first of its kind in the state of Maryland. And it was supported by both the sheriff and the state's attorney's office. That's why I created Maryland's first education choice fund called the Education Opportunity Fund, which provides more opportunities and assistance for the 5,000 children in Carroll County that attend private school, parochial school, and homeschool. That's why I exposed some of the more inconvenient truths on school funding. Spending per student is higher now than at any point in the history of Carroll County and has gone up nearly $500 per student in just the past 4 years. In the past 6 years, funding has gone up $22 million, despite the fact that an email went out to parents stating that they had cut $24 million. That's why I oppose Common Core, because it results in a loss of parental control over your child's education. I said no to the rain tax, and I told them I would take legal action if they tried to force one on Carroll, and they know that I meant it. A lot of candidates are talking these days about collaboration. Collaboration is used by weak Republicans who lack the conviction to say no to liberals that are stealing your freedoms. I have no interest in collaborating with liberals that infringe on your constitutional rights. My only goal is to defeat them. Why vote for me? I've kept all of my promises. I stopped the Pathways urbanization of District 4. I cut taxes 3 years in a row and will soon extract us from the incinerator without paying a $3 million exit fee demanded by a fellow commissioner. I did not yield under fire. That's why I am the only commissioner to receive endorsements from Dan Bongino, Senator Pipkin, Ellen Sauerbrey, and the Institute on the Constitution. My opponent, Ms. Biller, is endorsed by labor unions. See, you see, a commissioner is your last line of defense. You need strong leaders that will stand firm in Annapolis. I'm Richard Rothschild. I kept my promises and will serve you again if you entrust me with your vote on June 24th. Visit me at richardrothschild.org. Thank you, and may God bless Carroll County.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
I also hold an engineering degree, and for me, problems of this county are more like technical problems, things that need to be solved. We can't really use attack language and talk about how everything is a conflict between one group or another. There are no groups. We're all Carroll County. It's not really an issue of liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans. None of it matters. We have far too many issues to just bring it down to some us versus them mentality. It's just not an issue. And the county needs jobs, it needs incomes. Our education is great, but what are we teaching our kids? There's no jobs for them to do. When you go into the county and look for a job, what is it? You can be a stock boy, you can be a cashier. All we bring in is more retail stores, another shopping center. There's no industry, there's just no jobs, period. You know, we need a higher wage so we can afford the better housing, so that way we can afford the commercial retail, which is the only thing we bring into the area. So I would want to improve the skill set we teach our children in our schools. I want to bring in the jobs so they have something to do other than leave the county, which is the only thing we can do. We train and educate our population to leave. My last job was in Pennsylvania. I didn't have any jobs here to work in. I've worked them all already. We need to improve our area. We need to improve our infrastructure. We need to keep our farms out of the hands of more housing developments, more commercial retail, more things that will cost us money, and we have no wages, nothing we've earned to spend it. So I would want to keep the private corporations out of it and keep the government for the people.
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot to introduce our timers who are over here, Peg Wingfield and Sandy Souder, and I think the candidates already saw them with their signs, so they're timing them, and they'll give you. So if you see a stop sign, try to finish your sentence, and that's it. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're now going to go into the questions. We have got a bunch of questions, folks. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each one of the questions. And so I'm going to start with you, Mrs. Bill, okay? If you don't mind, all right? And then we'll go through, and then you won't always get the first one. I'll change them around.
Thank you.
All right, the first question. Please tell us how you feel the principles of smart growth do or do not fit into the planning strategies for District 4 and the entire Carroll community.
So smart growth seems to be, again, a few of those words that charge people, incite people. One of the first things I did when I considered running for county commissioner, Mount Airy was going through the master planning process to lay out what their vision was for their community. And there weren't really words in there. It was the communities working together to determine how the property would be either developed or kept as agricultural property. So it's not that I'm avoiding the word smart growth, but smart growth means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In theory, it's urbanization and having mass transit near where people live. There's a younger generation that likes an active urban lifestyle, and they search that out. There are others of us that have come to Carroll County that like the agricultural rural environment, and whether Mount Airy residents are willing to drive 30-some miles in very congested traffic to get jobs, that's their prerogative. But smart growth, I don't like. Smart growth is probably not smart growth, but master planning is the community's way to identify what they see their community now and in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rothschild.
Well, smart growth isn't smart. It's an attempt by government. It's not smart. It's an attempt by government to ram a single development template down our throats, whether we want it or not. We suffered through this 4 years ago, south of I-70. We hear a lot of happy talk with smart growth, things like smart, compact, walkable to promote community interaction, workforce housing. Most of the people that I know that moved to Carroll County moved to escape that very development template. See, when government starts deciding how to re-engineer our neighborhoods, that's a perfect example of government going beyond its constitutional boundaries. It's not government's job to tell us where to live, how to live, what to drive, when to drive, where to drive, what to farm, when to farm. It's not their job, but they want to do it because we let them in many cases, and it takes strong officials to stand up and simply say no. And the bitter irony of smart growth, they like to associate it with the word sustainability. When you look at the financial metrics behind smart growth, they don't work. In Carroll County, it takes a $300,000 house with a working husband and wife to generate sufficient tax revenue to pay the cost of services. When we build low-cost, affordable housing, quote unquote, inside the county, that housing, in most cases, does not generate sufficient tax revenue to pay for the cost of services. Therefore, the more smart growth you build, the more you have to raise the taxes of the remaining members of the community to subsidize those low-cost units. This is a continuing battle. It's being sponsored by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's being done under the auspices of environmental protection. Ironically, it has more stormwater runoff than I think any development template we're already using in Carroll County. So I don't think it's right from a constitutional standpoint. I don't think it's right from an environmental standpoint. And we certainly know that economically it does not, the numbers don't work. Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer.
I would like to keep the county as rural as possible. I mean, I grew up with green fields, rolling hills, farms. I mean, every summer you could smell the cow patties in the field across the road. But, you know, the county grows. You know, we need services, we need development, we get more population, it grows eventually. At some point, we're going to need to grow too. But I would make sure that the services we need are the services that get grown. I wouldn't just allow development across the country or the county, you know, just all willy-nilly let the developers do what they like, let the major corporations just build up whatever sort of, you know, commercial space that they want, you know, pave over the forests for another parking lot. I mean, if we don't need it, we shouldn't have it.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Rothschild. The stormwater tax or rain tax has been highly controversial. How would you work with the municipalities to accomplish the goals mandated by the EPA?
Well, first off, I've been one of the most vocal opponents of the rain tax inside of Carroll County. Understand that the rain tax was designed to form something called stormwater retrofits. But the premise that this is going to save the Chesapeake Bay within Carroll County is absurd. We've run the numbers, we've done the calculations. Carroll County right now could spend $50 million in 5 years on stormwater management. The total amount of pollution we will take out of the system is the exact same amount that will flow through the Conowingo Dam in 60 seconds during the next tropical storm. Using stormwater retrofits to try to solve this problem is the equivalent of trying to drain a swimming pool with an eyedropper while somebody else is filling it with a fire hose. Now, with respect to our municipalities, we're working that issue right now. There's some interesting dynamics where there's some synergies. Right now we have separate permits for a pollution discharge inside the county. The county has its own, and then each town has its own. It's very expensive for the county to remove pollution because we don't have much asphalt. But the towns have a lot of asphalt, so there's some economies of scales to be achieved. So what we're looking at right now is a possibility of going back to the Maryland Department of the Environment with what's called a unified NPDES permit, where we would all work together and then co-fund it with the towns. It benefits the towns because the county would be paying the majority of the cost, and it benefits the county because we achieve economies of scale by mining stormwater pollution where it's more likely to exist. Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer.
I don't even entirely understand the issue of why the rain tax came up in the first place. Because the private citizen does not have a large enough impervious surface to affect any stormwater. And the only people who do, I mean, even the cities are a large concrete slab, but they have sewer systems and water systems to manage that. The people who affect stormwater are like your Walmart, your Target, your shopping centers. They really have a minimum stormwater management, and the other regions that are major paves of asphalt are your state highways, your federal highways, your government property, and the government is excluded from the tax. They don't have to pay it. So 90% of all the impervious surface in this county is government-owned, like your roads, well, not the airport's private-owned, but I mean just those sort of infrastructure, and they don't have to pay it. So I don't entirely see the purpose of making the last 10% who don't even affect the environment pay 90% of this tax. It clearly makes no sense. And there was a plan. The county was going to pay the costs of this. It was all taken care of, and Maryland didn't like it. So I don't know. I would go back to the plan we had where the county was going to pay the necessary stormwater management costs, or make the 90% of the people who need to pay the tax pay it.
Thank you. Mrs. Bill.
Well, much has been said about the rain tax, and I think we've all seen enough of the slides of the sediment going over the Conowingo Dam. And Dorchester County was involved in this prior to this Board of Commissioners, and they put aside funds as well as Carroll County. Carroll County was very prudent in putting aside the funds so that they didn't have to charge a tax. But with all due respect, Commissioner Rothschild is putting our municipalities at risk by encouraging them to take some actions that are not proven that they will be able to hold up. And our municipalities could barely afford snow removal this winter. If you saw in the paper, they had a hard time making budget because we had an extremely hard winter. So to put them at additional legal risk and again, threaten litigation, which is far from being fiscally responsible. And what we truly have missed the mark on is the effect to small businesses in our county. Because we're right. I've talked to owners of companies like Land Sea Air that just moved into the old Kenore Brake facility, and if they get hit with the rain tax, it will put them out of business. So we've missed the mark here, and let's support our small business so that they can stay active in Carroll and keep developing jobs.
Thank you. Our next question is, what is your position on the proposed Gillis Falls Reservoir? And if anyone around here laughs, I know we've talked about this for at least 25 years. And maybe longer. Anyway, what is your position on the proposed Gillis Falls Reservoir? And if it's built, what about, won't this encourage increased housing? Mr. Schaefer, you're the first one.
I don't think supplying more water to the county is going to encourage more housing. We're going to have more housing as it is. People are going to just make more developments. We're going to have it. Another supply of water is not going to increase or decrease that. If we need more water services, then we are going to need another reservoir. But I would take a look at what's needed. How much of the water services do we need? Do we really need another reservoir? And what region of the county would it be serving? I don't particularly see this as something that's going to be causing a housing increase.
It's curious that if this is an issue that the county or the community has spoken about for years, yet we don't have any substantive decision, action, follow through. At some point, all developments will struggle with adequate water supply and sources, and it's an issue that will have to be addressed. Currently, I feel like we have higher priorities like our education system, and that would be a more near-term item that we need to address. And we can revisit the Gillis Falls Reservoir at the time, but it sounds like a very long-term project to get a reservoir underway.
Mr. Rothschild.
The issue of developing Gillis Falls, any water supply, is a two-sided coin. And depending on where your interests lie, you're either for it or against it. If you're a builder, you're probably for it because it opens up the door for development in zoning districts under 1 acre where well and septic systems are not feasible. If you're a business, you're probably for it because it opens up the door for more densification of the county and therefore more business, which is good for business. But the other side of the coin is existing homeowners who moved here to escape dense development patterns in places like Columbia, Germantown, Gaithersburg, Randallstown. They see increased water supply as being a throttle. And if we open up those supplies, it enables lots of development, and then the character and the rural nature of Carroll County are likely to change. And I'll be honest with you, folks, I struggle with this every day. I struggle with it every day. How do we strike the right balance? We want to enable prudent development. We want to enable and promote economic growth for our citizens, but we want to preserve the component of Carroll County which is so precious. We are a gorgeous, a beautiful rural agricultural county. We are on the endangered species list. So we have to be very, very careful that we exercise judgment, that we're prudent, we consider all the positive consequences, but all the unintended negative consequences, so we don't do something and then look back 10 years from now and go, uh-oh, we don't like what we ended up with. Thank you.
Next question. The current commissioners have struggled with the issue of waste to energy. What is your position on the waste to energy joint proposal with Frederick County? And if Carroll County withdraws, what is your vision for disposing of solid waste in the future? Ms. Spiller?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The theory of converting waste to energy sounds like a good theory. The methods or technology that exist must be evaluated to determine if the benefits outweigh the cost. This is a contentious issue also because we had a previous Board of Commissioners that moved in one direction, and then we had another Board of Commissioners come into play, which will happen every 4 years, and they reversed that decision. So is paying any money, $3 million or less, to get out of a contract, it's like throwing bad money after good. Is the waste-to-energy incinerator the best technology? Do we need it at this time? People talk about a lot of opportunities, and when you bring waste up as a topic, people become more aware, and maybe there's a pay-as-you-go program that would make them more aware. They would reduce the overall waste that they created. Is waste-to-energy needed? Well, we need to know what is our current capacity at the landfill, and at our current rate, when will that landfill be full? We don't want to wait until we're up to our eyeballs in trash to get out of it. So there are other alternatives, and Commissioner Rothschild has shared earlier that he's able to get us out of that agreement without costing us the $3 million. I'm willing to see if that can happen.
Mr. Rothschild.
Well, I'd love to sink my teeth into this question, but we're in final negotiations right now to actually exit that contract. So because of attorney-client issues, there's a lot that I cannot say right now, so I'm going to apologize in advance if I appear to be a little bit obscure. Suffice it to say, I was one of the most outspoken opponents of the contract 4 years ago. I simply don't believe that the government should be getting into that area of business. And I also prepared the video that went fairly viral in Frederick called Breaking Up is Hard to Do last year, which talked about the challenges in the incinerator and many of the concerns that I had with the contract. I can't be more specific because I just can't because of where we're at right now. Suffice it to say, we're going to be out of this thing very shortly. We're not going to pay the full $3 million as demanded by one of my fellow commissioners. We're going to negotiate our county out of this and save the county several $million in the process by being patient, by being savvy, and not jumping the gun for political purposes simply because there was an election season coming. Now, the other thing, what do we do once we're out of this? Well, some very interesting things are happening in the marketplace. I'm constantly approached by vendors that are private companies want to put in plasma gasification, pyrolytic converters, material recovery facilities, and then, of course, we have our present option, which is short-term reduction and avoidance through things like pay-as-you-throw and recycling. My personal goal was to let this play out a little bit longer. I want to get us out of this incinerator in the next couple of weeks, and then I believe we're just at the purge of being able to let the private sector take this over completely so we don't have to put our taxpayers at risk for any kind of new technology. I think you're going to see these things just becoming feasible in the next couple of years, but there is one caveat. Most of the companies that are interested in bringing plasma gasification or pyrolytics or even a materials recovery facility to Carroll want to import trash from outside of the jurisdiction because we produce so little in Carroll County. So short-term solution, I say we continue avoidance and reduction, maybe look at pay-at-you-throw. Long-term, I'm confident there'll be a private sector solution inside of Carroll County.
That was quick. Very good, Sandy. She got it out. Mr. Schaefer.
The entire issue with Frederick County is a raw deal to begin with. Everybody keeps referring to a contract. As far as my understanding goes, there is no contract. It's a memorandum of understanding, which is technically a slightly different thing. But whether or not we get out with, I don't think we should, there's nothing wrong with a waste-to-energy plant. The idea is sound, but the deal with Frederick County was never good for us to begin with. I'm not opposed to the idea of burning trash to produce fuel or to produce electricity, but it has to be done in an environmentally sound way, and right now I don't think there is one. I would rather take the material from the landfill or any more material coming in and actually recycle it or reclaim it, and once we get resources out of it that way, we can sell it for a profit and return that material back into the manufacturing line.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. Given that the current population of students attending Carroll County Public Schools has declined and is expected to remain low for some years, the current commissioners voted to not collect an impact fee from property developers at this time. Do you agree or disagree with this position, and why? And Mr. Rothschild's first. Yes.
Okay. You need to understand that impact fees have a very narrow purpose. They can only be used to expand school capacity. Given that our student population has been going down since 2006, and by 2018 will be 3,000 students less than it was in 2006, we do not have a need for additional capacity. Furthermore, the way the current state law is written, once we hold that money for 6 years, if we don't use it, we have to refund it anyway. So in effect, the commissioners really had no choice. If we'd continued to collect the impact fee, we'd have been forced under law to refund it anyway to the developers and the homeowners that had paid it. So as a practical matter, it just didn't make sense. There are some commissioners, I think, that would like to see the law changed to allow impact fees to be used for updating existing schools. There are certainly some benefits in that, but the law does not permit it today, so that's not an option for us. I think that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer?
If there's no need for the fee, if we don't need to collect it because there's no increase in capacity, I don't see a purpose to collect it. I don't see a purpose of taxing people for money that isn't going to be spent. I don't see why we should take away more of your income and revenue for a purpose that's undefined and it isn't going to be used and it's just going to sit there.
Ms. Beller?
I think that's one of those trick questions where they ask you, the commissioners didn't do anything that they weren't legally bound to do, so they did their job on that aspect and didn't challenge the law. So I think that was a very good thing.
Thank you. Let's see, we're starting with Mr. Schaefer. Do you believe that there is some baseline foundation of facts and experiences that all children need to be exposed to? And if yes, who should make that determination?
Well, for general knowledge, like math and science, that's pretty much cut and dry, cause and effect. I mean, there's no one who can sit there and argue that 2 + 2 = 5. But for other areas that are more objective, like history, I think that should start with the family. They're the ones who should begin education for children.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Miller?
Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. Do you believe that there's some baseline foundation of facts and experiences that all children need to be exposed to? And if yes, who should make that determination?
Well, it's fun to try to guess what people were thinking when they ask these questions. I mean, are we talking about the golden rule? And then, yes, that would be their mother and their father. That's the basic beginning of a child's education when they're born, and you start teaching them right from wrong. So that's where I believe their basic facts and experiences begin with parents teaching their children.
Okay. All right. Mr. Rothschild?
Well, I think this is a trick question too, but I'll take a shot at it here. I think this is probably trying to touch on issues related to our current education system, the direction the Common Core is taking us. Certainly, I think we all would agree, prima facie, that there's a need for our children to have certain baselines. The question is, what should those baselines be? The problem with Common Core, it is now government that will determine those baselines, not our parents and not our local school board. So that's a problem. The second element with respect to baselines is the role the parents play. See, the other half of education is values, spiritual values, family values, and I personally believe, based on what I've seen with respect to Common Core, that we have a curriculum which is increasingly de-Americanizing our children and moving our country away from God. And I've said many times before, I was on a panel a couple weeks ago with Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore, and somebody asked me a similar question about our education system and whether or not it was working correctly. And I said, well, you know, we are a unique country. We were the only country in the world founded under the principle that we have these unalienable rights from God, life, liberty, and property. How do you teach children unalienable rights when you've more or less purged God from education and purged God from government? So I think that's a problem. And one last thing I want to say real quickly is with respect to technology. It seems like a cliche. We need more technology. We need more technology. I personally believe we need less technology, at least in elementary schools. We need to teach our children how to read, write, and do mathematics and arithmetic before introducing them to calculators and computers. And I would say technology should not come in until about 6th or 7th grade. We're crippling them from the very beginning by letting them become dependent on these devices, and it's going to hurt them later in life.
Thank you. Page 38 of the Education Fact Book indicates Carroll's spending on education, when measured against its percentage of county wealth, is the 4th highest in the state. What would you do to get this spending under control? Oh, it's yours. I'm sorry.
Well,
Ms.
excuse me,
Miller.
did you get to answer the question also? On the golden, on the
I was the first
basic?
one asked.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Remember, it took me a second.
Sorry about that. Okay.
That's all right. You
So I
want it again?
apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. Page 28 of the Education Fact Book indicates Carroll's spending on education, when measured as a percentage of county wealth, is the 4th highest in the state. What would you do to get this spending under control?
And that's a loaded question. So yes, we have had declining enrollments. So when you look at expenditures and you look at them on a per-child basis, when you have a smaller base, it's a bigger number. And so these questions are very interesting because they obviously have a slant. What would we do to get that spending under control? Well, we have a couple things that are going to happen in the future, and you heard some announcements on economic development for some very large manufacturing companies that are moving into the county. With manufacturing companies come workers, and with workers come families, and with families come children. So we talk a lot about Manchester Valley, but we have a very large spice company that's moving over into that area. And won't it be interesting that if in 2 years, 3 years, when they build that company and they've fleshed it out with 300 employees, and those 300 employees are married with children, or whatever union with children, that now all of a sudden that school's full. So we've got some very exciting things happening, and our education spending, no visionary leader ever cut funding to education.
Mr. Rothschild.
Every citizen should get a copy of the Education Fact Book. I have the cover of one with me here. Because when you read this, you'll find that most of what we think we know about education funding in Carroll County is apocryphal. Apocryphal means something that's widely believed to be true, but in fact is not true in reality. Many people think we're one of the lowest funding counties in the state. We're not. We are 4th highest. We are 4th highest in the state. Every other county in Maryland is below us. That's 20 other counties below us. So we're spending quite a bit. And that measurement is education spending is a percentage of county wealth. We're spending at a very high level. So getting into the question itself, we've got a problem. There's no question that we have a financial challenge with our education spending. But those officials and commissioners that suggest we can fix this by just working the revenue side of the equation are leading us down a path that's going to be a dead end. We have to reduce overhead expenses. We've got to make sure the system is sized appropriately for our students. By 2023, we will be sitting at somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 empty seats, depending on what capacity number that you use. Funding empty schools, funding empty classrooms doesn't improve the quality of education. We need to shift our spending mix. And when I say we, it's the Board of Education. I think the Board of Education has not done a very good job. I think they need to reset their priorities. We need to spend less money on overhead, less money on infrastructure, and that'll free up more money to pay our teachers. It's a bitter irony, the direction that we seem to be going and that we seem to be getting pushed by folks in our fine education institutes is the very direction that will not yield the results we need. We've got to cut the spending side of this equation. We've got to cut overhead, and then we can reallocate those monies into things that we really need to do, like improve teacher salaries.
Mr. Schaefer.
I don't see a problem with being the 4th highest funded in the state. I mean, that sounds like a good thing. The problem is where that money is being spent. Is it spent efficiently? When Friendship Valley was first built, you could take a tour of the school. It was, completely full of all these computers and all these laser disc players and all this technology, and the very next year it was gone. I have no idea where the equipment went to. So we spend money on things and then we don't use it. It disappears. We change the program, or we we just waste the funds. So I would want to make sure that the funding goes to where it's actually being useful.
Thank you. Thank you. Did I ask you? I lost track.
She was first.
You were first. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mr. Rothschild, you're next. Do you support rezoning more land to create more office parks in District 4? And if so, how many acres do you propose?
Asking me if I support more office parks is kind of like asking somebody if they support more chocolate. In appropriate quantities, yes. But what we have to be careful of is that we don't cross the line and go a bridge too far like we did in Pathways. Pathways tried to rezone, I think it was between 4,000 and 5,000 acres into office parks. I think we went too far. I think that threatened the rural fabric of our communities. I think that threatened to make Carroll County look more like Gaithersburg or Germantown, and clearly the citizens spoke very loud, and they do not want it. Now, do I think we can do some surgical rezoning? Yes, I do. I think we can put limited commercial development in places where it is not destructive of our existing communities. But I think we're looking at a level of rezoning that's maybe 10%, maybe 20% at most, compared to what Pathways was doing. But we have to be very careful, too, because to me, property rights is a very serious issue. People buy houses in residential areas, agricultural areas, because there's conservation land. They say to themselves, gee, this is conservation land. It's going to be conserved. And then, surprise, an ambitious government planner gets a hold of it and says, oh, no, we're not going to let this be conservation. We're going to turn this into an office park because we know better than you what this land should be. And not only do you disrupt that neighborhood, but you impinge upon the value of those other property owners whose house values go down if the lot across the street becomes a 7-Eleven or an office building instead of a residential or agricultural or conservation area. So my final answer, very limited quantities. We have to be very careful not to disrupt the rural fabric of Carroll County. That's why I'm here, and I suspect that's why most of you are here. If you wanted all this dense development, you'd move back into Montgomery County or Howard County, and we don't want that in Carroll.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer?
I wouldn't. I'm just going to flat out just say no. The rezoning laws we have in Carroll County are actually rather complicated if you were trying to look at them. We have like 7 or 8 different zonings for just residential areas. It's confusing, and then when you lap overlays on top of it, it gets hard to determine what the lot is supposed to be allowed to be used for. We don't need more office parks. Most of our office spaces can satisfy our needs that we have. We would have to take a look at what growth we're going to get to decide if we want more, but I don't think we're going to need more.
Thank you. Ms. Spiller?
Well, it's an interesting question because it begs the discussion probably about the Harrison-Leishier property, which seems to be a bit contentious. And it's interesting that the commissioner's not chosen to talk about that specifically because there are some actions by the county underway to develop that property, whether the citizens of Mount Airy want that or not. Developers are probably drooling over that property. The other issue becomes the fact that the previous Board of Commissioners worked on a master plan that there was a lot of contention over, and again, we threw out the word pathways and scared a lot of people that their property rights were going to be stolen. So the incoming Board of Commissioners asked that the previous board give them professional courtesy and not approve that plan, which they did. And here we are 3.5 years later, and much has been talked about that plan, but not a lot has been done. Some wordsmithing has been done and putting political terms in that plan that do not belong in that plan. So people are wondering what's going to happen because they're not sure, because we do not have a plan that kind of guides us in terms of what we're going to do. So there are issues that need to be addressed.
Thank you. The next question is Mr. Schaefer. Given that Carroll County is a bedroom community, response time for volunteer fire departments and ambulance service can become an issue during the work week. What steps might you take to reduce this problem?
I would want to improve our emergency plans that we have for the county. We do need more services, not just firefighters, but police, paramedics. Overall, we do need to improve that area. I would want to fund that area as much as we need to improve that to get to where the point that we need to go.
Thank you. Ms. Spiller?
That's an interesting question because those statistics are gathered and put in. And in talking to folks at the firehouse in both New Windsor and Union Bridge, their statistics don't show an issue with response time. The issue also becomes, are we at the tipping point between having a volunteer fire service and a paid fire service, and can the county afford that? The county has had the benefit for many years of the dedication of local men and women to support the fire companies, and we are also blessed that they have become very good fundraisers, professional fundraisers. So they do a lot of things to support themselves. The answer becomes, as we look at data, if there is an issue with response time, which, as I understand, I think this question originated from one instance from one firehouse, and that was an instance where also the commissioners recently went against the zoning commission's recommendations to continue more development there. So we do need to work with our fire companies, support them when they need capital projects, like Sykesville when they had a fire and they needed to rebuild, and one of our commissioners voted against that loan to them.
Mr. Rothschild.
Some of our fire districts are stressed. The one circumstance that Ms. Biller was referring to, though, it was very unusual. We had a house, some young men and women who were building houses, and just a couple. And at the last minute, when going through final site plan review, they had to change the location of the driveway. Since they were right on the borderline between two districts, the driveway ended up going from one district into the other district, where the resources were approaching inadequate. And that change was forced upon them by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so the commissioners found that to be an extraordinary circumstance, and they decided to overrule the Planning and Zoning Commission and let these people move forward, since they had already spent tens of thousands of dollars, and they weren't exactly what you would call wealthy people. But I've already told CCV, our Volunteer Emergency Services, that funding for our emergency services was a priority for me, and I've actually talked about doing a couple of things in specific. Number one, we don't have a real good track record in collections for our ambulance services, and I've proposed some creative alternatives that would improve collections for our ambulance services during my meetings with the president of our emergency services, Danny Brothers. And the other thing I think we need to do is, I don't think a lot of people realize how lucky we are to have volunteer services, and I have proposed to President Denny Brothers that we create a volunteer fire department appreciation day in Carroll County, and encourage citizens on the way home from work to stop by their local firehouse, meet the people there, make a donation, make a pledge, and try to boost these people up, because we really do have a treasure. It's part of the Americana of American communities, of Carroll County communities, and if we don't learn to cherish it and appreciate it, we could lose it, and then the cost will triple if we have to go to a paid force. So we really have to start working more with our volunteer fire department to make sure we pump some more money into that organization to see that they succeed.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
I thought I was the first one asked.
Fire department?
Yeah, the fire department?
Did I do that?
She's not. Oh, yeah, right, yes, right.
That's what I get for not making all my little checks here. That's what I get.
I always thought I was the first one asked.
So I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to start with you then, Barbara Biller, Mrs. Biller. What are your views on agricultural preservation in Carroll County?
I'm proud to say, and through no efforts of my own, but Carroll County is one of the shining stars, not only in the state of Maryland, but in the country for ag preservation. And it characterizes, quite frankly, the county, and one of the reasons why I love living here. So, big supporter of ag preservation. I hate to see it attacked or threatened by lack of investment in funds, and that has happened recently. So we had a goal at the county for so many acres of ag preservation, and again, it's being threatened by lack of commitment and investment. Some of these things are investments. They are not merely expenses. Ag preservation is one, education is another, and we need to stop looking at them with the viewpoint of they're merely liabilities or expenses.
Mr. Rothschild?
Well, I don't know what Ms. Biller is referring to, because we've been fully funding and moving forward aggressively with ag preservation in Carroll County. Joe's here. I'm sure he knows that, former president of the Farm Bureau. But understand that ag preservation is a very interesting thing, because it means different things to different people. To environmentalists like it because it preserves the environment. Farmers like it because it preserves large blocks of farms, which creates economies of scale, and it also produces an income stream for their families. And the average citizen likes ag preservation because it preserves the rural landscape of the county. So this is one of those interesting things, although it's not necessarily a constitutional role of government, it seems like all the parties involved are giving it a thumbs up. The citizens, the farmers, the environmentalists. So we support it. And thanks to ag preservation, we have beautiful landscape that's being preserved throughout Carroll County, and I think the citizens are happy. And as long as you're happy spending your tax dollars on it, I'll continue to fund it. I will say this. While we're putting things in ag pres, we have to be very sensitive to the fact that our farming operations themselves are under attack. These environmental mandates, things like the phosphorus management tool, nutrient runoff requirements, fencing. I know of 2 dairy farmers who sold their herds recently in Carroll County because of these ridiculous mandates that are coming down from Annapolis that are not going to have any real valence with respect to improving the bay water quality. So our farmers are under attack. So if we're going to support ag pres, we need to simultaneously making sure that we're in Annapolis every year defending our farming rights from these brutal attacks that jeopardize the economic viability of our farming operations.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
I fully support ag preservation. I grew up surrounded by farms. I liked the farms. You could go across the street and feed the horses. It was, just a great time to grow up. I would also want to expand the various farmers markets we have so that way the farmers can sell more of their produce and collect more of a profit so they can sustain their farms and not have to lose them to housing developments. There was a farm not far from where I live just sold because the family just decided not to farm it anymore, I suppose, and then now it's going to be a housing development again. And where BG&E has been putting in the gas line, somebody actually came up to us and wanted to know if that was houses. We had to correct him and tell him it was the gas line, but he thought it was houses going up on the farmland again. So I fully support ag preservation.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Rothschild, you're next. What's your position on the legal process known as coordination as a tool forcing federal and state government to comply with federal laws?
Coordination is a legal term. It comes out of federal regulations. But simply put, there are federal laws designed to protect local governments like Carroll County against oppressive federal regulations. There's a federal law called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And what NEPA says is this. It says that the federal government or any state government operating under the auspices of the federal government cannot demand that we implement mandates in such a way that it jeopardizes our economy, our heritage, our property right, our farms, our ability as a county to reasonably fund our other critical services such as schools. But here's the issue with the law. It's been applied successfully dozens of times west of the Mississippi, but never east of the Mississippi to my knowledge. And I brought this to the Maryland Association of Counties last year and had a team of lawyers explaining it to commissioners from across the state. Here's the thing. These federal laws are designed to protect you, will not enforce themselves. And the only people that have the ability to demand they be enforced are local county officials, boards of supervisors and county commissioners. So my position is this. If they continue with these attacks and it continues to jeopardize the heritage of Carroll County, if it continues to jeopardize our businesses, if it affects our dairy farmers, our crop farmers, our ability to fund our schools, then I will move forward with the Board of Commissioners and I will invoke coordination against the state of Maryland and we will demand that they come in and show that they are not damaging our environment. We will show that they are damaging the human environment of Carroll County, the human environment being our economy, our heritage, our culture. And we know as a fact that most of the times when local governments invoke coordination, they have been successful across the United States in pushing back hostile federal and state regulations that jeopardize our economic and social welfare.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
It's our power and ability to implement the laws as we need to. It's constitutional. Any power that is not reserved by the federal or the state is ours. And so we can choose how to implement these regulations, and I would implement them in a manner that would be beneficial to everyone. I wouldn't use any sort of conflict or attack language. I'm not going to try to make it an us versus them issue. But when it comes to something that we legally have to do, I would implement it in a manner that would benefit all of us.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiller?
Coordination has to do with the EPA, and Commissioner Rothschild is absolutely right. Most of it has happened west of the Mississippi. I encourage all of you to go out and get the information yourself, because what you're going to hear here tonight is a little bit of truth, and then it builds a little bit farther, and then it goes to some statement that, my gosh, the sky is falling. Be informed. Look up coordination. See how the EPA has used that ruling across the U.S. I have. I looked at it, and I was kind of scratching my head saying, how would this apply here? And I'm sure if you get enough attorneys in the room and you want to pay them, they'll let you know. So I am not in support of continuing to fight windmills with our taxpayer money on litigation if it is not applicable to what is happening here in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer, you're next. What steps would you take to encourage economic development in Carroll County?
Well, I would want a certain kind of economic development. We already have enough commercial retail spaces. We have enough housing developments. We need industries. We need trades. We need craftsmen. We need people who can do things and make things. So I would encourage them to come to this county and not more commercial space. Commercial space just uses up our services without any sort of return on any sort of benefit. So I would work to encourage industry and not commerce.
Okay. Ms. Miller?
What's interesting, here I sit at a table with two engineers, but I'm the one who owns a manufacturing company. And I'm very passionate about that. I've worked in engineering and manufacturing my entire professional career. What I've done over the years is to encourage, we have bright students here, coupled with our rural community. We have students, we have people who grow up that know how to work with their hands, they know what tools are for, they know what equipment does. We have a unique opportunity, and we have a lot of very precision machining shops here in the county. What I've been working on over the past several years is encouraging that engineering progression, because with engineering you also have innovation. And when you have innovation and you couple that with the ability to manufacture and make things, you create jobs. You create jobs that maybe you didn't even know existed before. We have a very good talent base here. We have Project Lead the Way that then leads to a potential 2-year engineering degree at the community college that while I was on the board, we supported bringing that to bear. So now we have this affordable, accessible engineering pathway, and we have the Career and Tech Center. We can put some of these assets together to do what I've been doing for 20 years to create jobs. I see the sign go up, so
All right. She can ring the bell for you if you want to wait.
No, I'm not keen on the bell.
You don't want the bell. Okay. Okay, the next question I have it right here. Okay.
I don't think I answered that yet.
Okay, let's see. We're starting with Mr. Rothschild. Did I mix
No,
up?
we're still doing economic development.
We're still. Ooh,
didn't get to answer that question.
she
Barbara was
did
first.
that. It's
I was
Oh,
first.
you were first. Okay. I
their
have to do
fault.
economic
Okay,
development.
economic development. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Well, first off, when I took office, one of the conundrums the entire Board of Commissioners faced was the organizational structure of our Department of Economic Development. In the past, it had been run by a single department director. And I had discussion with my fellow commissioners, and I proposed a different organizational structure, which was really a new concept for our county. And I proposed that we separate economic development into two components, under the premise that they're completely different skill set. One component being strategic account development, strategic high-end commercial accounts where you've got development, commercial development, you've got large buildings, you're dealing with CEOs of Fortune 1000 companies. And we brought in an administrator named Jack Lyburn, and Jack is a genius. I have to tell you, he's a genius. And then we created another prong. And the other prong that commissioners created was the Small Business Advisory Services. We call that the Small Business Navigator under an MBA. His name is Jack Weedman. And by separating these skill sets out, we're much more focused and much more effective. I want to say one more thing about economic development, though. I want to go back to being careful. There's some assumptions floating around in planning departments throughout America that people want to work where they live. But it's not always true, because when I talk to people in South Carroll, many of them had jobs in Montgomery County and Howard County. They moved away from their jobs to live here, and now they commute back to where their old jobs were. They do not necessarily want those office buildings co-located with their homes. So we have to be very careful we don't make assumptions that are not true.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to get this right. Spiller. What would you, no, let me rephrase this a second, because let me this. What is your position on Common Core? I think Mr. Rothschild referred to that before, and I think that's probably what that other question really was trying to do without saying Common Core, I'm guessing. That other one about the, whatever, never mind.
Is that a multiple choice, true, false,
True,
right,
false?
left?
What would you like? What would you like? However you like to do. Yeah.
Well, let's fire the crowd up.
Go for it.
Common Core, very heated subject. Whether you believe it was, whether you questioned the origins of it, and I'm trying to be politically correct here, whether it was designed by teachers or designed by a company out to control testing, and I think what our education needs to be about is a high-performance standard. Common Core, in theory, is a standard that you develop curriculum around. And we also have always controlled in Carroll County the curriculum that we deliver in our school system. There's a lot of Common Core curriculum out there that teachers have written that they're willing to share other teachers. We need to determine what is right as curriculum in our community, and we can do that. Should we have a standard? I am all about academic excellence and rigor at the community college level, at the elementary school level, at the middle school level, at the high school level. I say we challenge our students to be the best that they can.
Thank you. Mr. Rothschild.
Forget the dispute over whether Common Core is a federal takeover of education. It is. It is. And the transformative matrix for Common Core should be of concern to everyone in this room, because it's a cloverleaf. And at the very top of that cloverleaf, there's something there that disturbs me a lot, because it doesn't say God. It doesn't say American citizen. It doesn't say the Constitution. It says global citizen. Common Core establishes a command and control structure. Oh no, Commissioner, that's not true. It was a bottoms-up process from the Governors Association. No, it wasn't. I'm a county commissioner. I have no right to tell you what to eat tomorrow. But if I go to the Carroll County Nutrition Society and bribe them with $1 million to prepare a lunch menu made entirely of Brussels sprouts, and then I bribe every restaurant in Carroll County with $1 million to adopt that menu, you're eating Brussels sprouts tomorrow whether you want it or not. See, they use grant coercion to extend the role of reach of government beyond its constitutional boundaries. It puts a command control structure in place throughout America. It takes control away from our parents. It takes control away from our local Board of Education, and it needs to be stopped. And it's being phased in very cleverly. The first half is with English language arts and math, relatively non-controversial topics. But I've seen what's coming, because the second half of Common Core consists of the next generation science standards, and then, of course, history and social studies. I've read the next generation science standards. Some of the assumptions and premises in the NGSS are blatantly still matters of dispute. It goes so far. It doesn't say to the children, discuss global warming and what might be causing it. It goes so far, and I'm going to try to quote it from memory. It tells teachers to tell children to discuss the major role that humans play in causing global warming. I can give you a book right now with 650 scientists, many who were in the UN IPCC, many who work for government agencies like NASA, who will say that is patently not true. Make no mistake, and it's involving park tests are involved in testing it, and if the federal government paid for the park tests, those tests will drive what our children have to know.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
This is the fifth education standard that I've heard of. We've had so many over the past 10 or 15 years. I've lost track of how many education standards we've had. We need a consistent metric in order to measure children's progress. And if we need to change that metric, so be it. But if we don't have a consistent way of measuring performance, we're not going to figure out what our performance is. And right now, we're the 35th. The United States is the 35th in the world. So if you want a high-performance education standard that makes you the top of the bottom, well, go right on ahead. But we need a way of measuring the progress, and since we're still allowed to develop our own curriculum, we can develop our own curriculum. But we need the way of measuring the progress to make sure our children are learning what they need to learn, because right now we're just about dead last. We're on the same scale as like Zimbabwe or some other third world countries out there. And we need progress, a way to measure what we currently are and where we need to go.
Thank you. Next question. Mr. Rothschild, you get to start with this one. Given the reality that we live in a democratic-controlled state, how do you believe local officials should act with state government in order to have our voices heard and be able to influence state policy without hurting Carroll County interests?
Well, that's the age-old question. It really boils down to one thing. It boils down to two things, actually, principles or appeasement. We've been appeasing Annapolis for the last couple of decades. It hasn't gotten us very much, has it, folks? We've got rain taxes. We've got phosphorus management tools. We've got Planned Maryland, state control of our land with tiers that prohibit use of our land, of direct violation of 5th and 14th Amendment property rights. So clearly appeasement hasn't worked. And I have a theory that when we participate in bad votes with things like the gun bill, SB 281, we simply legitimize it. I think Republicans across America need to learn how to start fighting back. I speak all over the country, I speak all over the state, and one of the things I say is it's time for local officials to start upholding their oath of office. If Annapolis is going to use its liberal hypermajority to take away our rights, then there needs to be an equal but opposite reaction from every local government. They pass an unconstitutional gun bill. Every Republican Board of Commissioners in this state should have passed a nullification resolution like we did, prohibiting the use of county resources to enforce it. They pass a rain tax. Every Republican county in the state should have passed a nullification resolution saying we're not going to enforce it because it violates the Constitution. Why? Because the presumptive assumption of the rain tax is that your use of your property is polluting the bay, but they have no evidence of that. They have no tangible proof. In fact, I suggested that we insert language into our master plan which says the following. The presumptive position of the Carroll County Board of Commissioners is that your lawful use of your property is not polluting the environment. In the event of a dispute, the burden of proof shall be on the state to prove that it is. See, we have to learn how to fight back. We get elected and we become part of the wheels of government that are grinding us down, and that is why it is necessary for local officials to start taking a position to defend your constitutional freedoms and fighting back, even though it's painful sometimes. And that is exactly what I have been doing, and there's a lot of officials across this state. And if we don't start fighting, we're going to lose everything we've got. Appeasement is not an option anymore. They've got us up against the wall.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
This isn't just our responsibility. This is also the responsibility of our delegates and our senators here locally. And everyone has pretty much dropped the ball on this one. No one is trying to cooperate with anybody. Nobody in the state listens to us. We don't listen to them. Nothing's working out. It's been just one conflict after another, and it's just the entire thing is just falling through. So, I would do what I have to do. I'm not going to make compromises, but if nobody's going to listen, then I'm not going to talk anymore.
Thank you. Mrs. Biller.
I don't want anyone to think that it's an easy job being Republicans in a largely Democratic state. However, there's nothing more fearsome than a lioness waiting. And the yelling and the banging the table has not been effective. Solid, knowing where you stand, making your point. Our voice can be heard in Annapolis, strong and loud, but quietly with authority. And working with the delegation is one way that we do it. And we can fight the uphill battle. I will tell you, I have fought an uphill battle being a woman working for a defense contractor for 23 years. It was definitely an old boys club, but I made it. I work in manufacturing. A lot of boardrooms I sit in, not a lot of women sitting in there. More now, but there weren't many then. You can make your point. You can use the methods that are available to you, and you don't have to yell and bang your shoe on the ground, it becomes blah, blah, blah. Now, not the incumbent is difficult. So don't have all the facts and figures in front of me because I've not been doing this for 3.5 years. But I assure you, my first 6 months, 9 months into the year, I'm a fast learner, and we'll work with the delegation. I've worked with legislators getting funding for the community college. I know how to be effective.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer, we're going to start with you. Do you feel the school board is justified in requesting additional funding from the commissioners in light of the fact that they have a $15.5 million surplus and an almost 9% decline in student enrollment in the last 10 years?
Well, that depends on who you ask. If you ask them, they'll tell you they don't have a surplus. But I would want to fund the areas that need funding. There's a lot of waste. I think there's some waste in our schools. They buy a lot of equipment that seems to disappear. I've seen it vanish. I don't know where it goes. And it would depend on what they need the money for. I do think some things need to be funded. We don't fund the bands. We don't fund arts. We don't fund a lot of programs that need to be funded. We focus a lot on fads. Lately, it's all been STEM programs, but the STEM programs only go so far. They don't teach them the fields that they need to be taught. We removed electronics from all the high schools and the tech centers in Carroll County, and that's a very basic fundamental for technology. So I would want to make sure the money is spent in areas where it needs to be.
Thank you. Mrs. Biller?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Do you feel the school board is justified in requesting additional funding from the commissioners in light of the fact that they have a $15.5 million surplus and almost 9% decline in student enrollment in the last 10 years?
So the question is, the school board is asking for more money. I believe we're in the budgeting process, so that is the process. The school board comes in and asks for funds for the following year. The surplus is that surplus that they have not underspent their budget, being prudent, because I don't believe any of us spends our checkbook down to zero or negative. And I'd like to make the point, I don't have my calculator in front of me, but is it $15 million?
15 and a half. That's what this
$15.5
says.
million. And is that operating expense money? I mean, there's these statistics, again, arm yourselves with the information. I'd have to know what percent of their budget this is. And is it a contingency fund for exigency where they're not sure the funds they're going to get from the county and they can not sure about the funds they will get from the state? They have to pay their bills. And if they use that surplus as carry forward to fund their future year operating budget, that's what some organizations do. So it's an unclear question, I'm sorry, but I don't know that the school board is asking for more money. They're going through the budgeting process. And at the end of the year, they have a surplus on the books. That seems to be how I see what the question was about.
Thank you. Mr. Rothschild?
There's two sides to every financial equation, the funding side and then the expense side. And the problem I'm having right now with our Board of Education is they're focusing mostly on the funding side. And there have been some apocryphal pieces of information released. Recently, on January 9th, an email went out saying that the school system had cut $24 million over the last 6 years. People wrongly interpreted that as meaning that the Board of Commissioners had cut their budget $24 million, when in fact, funding from the commissioners went up by $23 million over that period. There's been no slashing of the education budget. It's been relatively flat the last couple of years, while enrollment's been going down, which means spending per student has gone up. We've had some bad decisions that we've made in this county. It started with Manchester Valley High. That was a $10 million a year bogey. It's been a real weight and drain on the Board of Education's budget. But unfortunately, I think we're at a point now where we're continuing to kick the can down the road by not making the tough decisions. Using state-rated capacities, we're going to have 7,000 empty seats by 2023. We can either spend our money on overhead, or we can spend our money on things like teachers' salaries. I think we need to cut overhead. And personally, as an experienced business manager, I'm an MBA, worked in Fortune 100 America. I believe it's time for a management change in the Board of Education. We need to get some conservatives on the Board of Education who will make the tough spending cuts that we need to make to get this beast under control. We got a couple good candidates in the room here. Jim Rennick, Bud Nason, George Harmoning, and I think we need to get some good conservatives on the Board of Education that will make the tough decisions to go through a redistricting and shut down a couple of our obsolete schools that are 80 years old and are at end of life. Then we can plow that money back into the school system and fix their problems by working on the expense side rather than simply trying to pump more money into it, because we simply do not have the money. Those that send me letters saying fully fund education, the money is not there. I cannot do it without cutting something else. A single step increase for our teachers, which they deserve, $6 million. That's what our sheriff's department costs us to operate, almost.
Mr. Schaefer? Did we get you?
I thought I was
Did I get you on
first.
that one? Yeah, that's entirely possible. Yes. Good to get along. That's all right. I started with you. All right. I'm starting with you, Mrs. Miller.
Just go right down there. It'll be easier to keep track of.
Yeah, there's only 3 of you, and I'm still having an issue. If elected, will you provide a complete financial disclosure statement prior to taking office, listing partnerships, property holdings of your spouse and children, as well as your own employment?
Yes. As a member of the Carroll Community College Board of Trustees since 2005, I've submitted without hesitation an annual notarized financial disclosure statement as per the standard of conduct of the Maryland Public Ethics Law. Anyone who balks at that responsibility implies or gives the perception that a conflict exists. Serving the public comes with an expectation of transparency, and full disclosure is both required to assure no conflicts of interest exist. I've filed my ethics form with the county and with the state.
Thank you. Mr. Rothschild.
Well, I've also filed my ethics disclosure every year, and I believe I'm in complete compliance with the law also, but it's difficult because the Board of the State of Maryland passed a new ethics ordinance, which I believe is unethical. It asks us to do things that sometimes there's impossible compliance. For example, suppose someone has signed a non-disclosure. Suppose Dick over here signed a non-disclosure to open up a center for battered women in Allegheny County or in Pennsylvania or West Virginia, and they both agreed they wouldn't disclose the location to protect the security of the women that are there. This ethics law that the state passed has no provision to prevent an impairment of pre-existing contracts. You cannot impair existing contracts. That is unconstitutional, and it does it. So there's some issues. Suppose he has children that live at home, or he got married late in life. He's 60 years old, he got married, and his wife had assets in a trust. She chooses not to disclose them to him. He has no way of complying. Complying can be an impossibility if she chooses not to share that data with him. So the fact of the matter is there's been a lot of gnashing of the teeth with this ethics disclosure because it in and of itself is unconstitutional and unethical and makes no provision for these types of extraordinary circumstances, which are very real.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
I will make it easy for everybody right now. I have nothing to disclose. I have no business interests. I have no partnerships. I have no property other than the one I reside in, which is the disclosure form asks if you have other property than what you reside in. I also have no knowledge of my family's finances, so I can't disclose anything there either.
They want you to.
Yeah, well, I know that. But I don't see the point of you disclosing information regarding your family because you're not going to know everything. You might know what somebody says. You might know that somebody maybe had trouble with the electric bill this month or something, but you don't know all their finances. You can't disclose the information. You don't know it. And as far as conflicts of interests go, it is a conflict of interest even if you did know what your family's finances were. I have relatives in other states. I don't know what their finances are. How am I supposed to report the finances of my, sister who happens to live in Montana? I don't even speak with her. I don't know what to report. So, but.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Rothschild, you're next for this question. Would you support increasing county employees' pay to keep up with inflation, and why? Yes, no, why?
Would I support increasing county employees' pay to keep up with inflation? Well, a better question would be, would I like to? And the answer is yes, I would like to. But the reality is we can't afford to. Our revenue growth at the county level is only going up about 1 to 1.5% every year. and we simply don't have the funds. Inflationary pressures are consuming that little bit of extra. Teachers' pensions consumed over 50% of all of our revenue growth in the last 2 years. So it's not a question of will, it's a question of ability. And quite frankly, there's too many people I know in the private sector that are making a fraction of what they were making 5 or 10 years ago. The average salary in the private sector in Carroll County is about $40,000. We cannot treat our taxpayers like bottomless ATM machines that we keep taxing in order to grow the salaries and benefits of government employees. Now, I love our government employees, and we got some of the best in the country, I guarantee you. We got some great people. But we cannot continue to take money from the private sector and transfer it to the government sector. So the answer at this point in time is no, I cannot agree to that.
Okay, good. Good. Thank you. I'm sorry. Mr. Schaefer.
I too support increasing the salaries, but I would increase not just the government employees' salary. I would want a higher minimum wage in Carroll County. And that would increase not just our salaries, but everyone's salaries. And if you get into a higher income bracket from having a higher minimum wage, then that would increase tax revenue so we could pay the higher salaries of government workers. So I would tackle the problem from both ends. I would want to see everyone's wage go up, and that would bring in more revenue to pay others.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiller.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Would you support increasing county employees' pay to keep up with inflation? Yes, no, why?
We really have not been in an inflationary economy, so that's somewhat of an interesting question. And raising pay levels as pegged to inflation is tricky business, and some industries may be able to peg their revenue to inflation, but I don't believe government does. And certainly in our environment where conservatively we are trying to reduce the burden to the taxpayer, I would not necessarily support pay raises tied to inflation.
Thank you. Before I go to the next question, if anyone has any other questions that they want, anyone in the audience, could you please get them up, wherever, Claudia? Yeah, yes, somebody, if you've got any other questions, just so we can get those taken care of, okay? Thank you. Next question, and I'm starting with Mr. Schaefer. Wait a minute. What will you do to protect our farmers and businesses from the next round of regulatory mandates that come from the EPA and Annapolis?
I would do whatever would be necessary. Mandates are, if we're talking about another round of unfunded mandates of programs that are being forced on people without the funding to provide them, I wouldn't fund them. We can't have mandates without the money to pursue the programs. I would want to preserve our agricultural heritage. I want to preserve the farms. I want to keep keep the county as rural as we can here, and I'm not going to implement any sort of program that doesn't have the funding to go with it.
Thank you. Where am I? I am Mrs. Brewer. Protect our farmers and businesses.
It's a very generic question. What will we do to protect our farmers and businesses from hypothetical or potential mandates? In order to protect businesses, and on the business side, I'm very in tune with mandates that are put out by the state, like the minimum wage law, that are very difficult to deal with when you have a commercial company. You need to be involved, you need to be in the forefront, you need to have your ear to the ground to know what the legislators are working on. And we have a bit of a disconnect between our Board of Commissioners and our delegates and our senators. We need to work more closely together so we are in tune with potential legislation coming up in Annapolis and be able to be ahead of it rather than reactionary. It's very difficult to react to things like the rain tax if you're a business person when you've not planned for it, when you've not been able to readjust your cost structure or your approach to increasing revenue to reply and respond to these mandates. So you've got to have better working with your legislators to know what's on the forefront and how you're going to attack it.
Thank you. Mr. Rothschild.
This is the epic challenge we face right now, and I believe I've been at the forefront in fighting this in the state of Maryland. I've got my ear close to the ground. I stay in regular touch with folks like Joe Kuhn, who's the former president of the Farm Bureau, Billy Harrison, the current president of the Farm Bureau. I speak with our chamber members. But we do have federal laws that we can use to protect us if we're willing to enforce them. I mentioned NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, but there's another act called the Federal Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. And you know what it says? It says that the federal government cannot promulgate mandates that are unfunded if it will have a harmful effect on the human environment of a local government. And you know what the human environment is defined as? It's not just our air and our water, it's our businesses, it's our farms, it's our heritage. So we're moving in a direction of invoking that. 2 Eastern Shore counties have adopted coordination as of January, as of January. And this is not a legal process. We don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. This is an administrative hearing process, much like a planning and zoning meeting, where we would call up government officials at the state level and say, come on down, we're going to have a little hearing here, because we're going to show that you're hurting us, and we want you to prove that what Farmer Jones is doing with his cattle are actually damaging the Chesapeake Bay. Show us your evidence. And if they don't have the evidence, then we can push back these regulations. Across America, local governments have been able to reopen forest roads, restore grazing rights, reopen mines, reopen uranium mines. Very successful. The success rate's been something like 92% across the country. And I think Carol needs to be prepared to move forward with this administrative process. If we do not defend ourselves, our silence will be interpreted as acquiescence, and that acquiescence will be interpreted as surrender. We have to defend ourselves, and that means your local commissioners have to go to bat and demand that the federal government obey its own regulations and its own laws.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer. Did I get you? I didn't get you. Yeah. Did I?
I was asked first.
See, now, man, it doesn't even help if I make check marks here. It doesn't even help. Okay. All right. All right.
We need to get you a system, Carol.
I know. I need, yes. All right. Okay. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Miller. Sea levels are rising in the Chesapeake Bay area through both additional heating due to climate change and land subsidence from the last ice age. Carroll County is non-contiguous with the bay. Excuse me. What civic obligation do you see as Carroll County's responsibility?
I think this was asked the other night also.
Okay.
We are a community that was founded on agriculture, and I believe when you're a farmer or when your living depends on the ground, you're going to be a good steward of it. Now, are we going to take it to the nth degree? Well, if we have to, and we have to stand our rights and protect ourselves, but I believe as a community we'll do the right thing to not foul our own water and our own ground, which is the source of our living. I also believe that we're pretty smart at that, and we may have a few things to show the rest of the state. Does all the water run down to the Chesapeake Bay? Some of it runs down to the Potomac if you're in the western part of the county. So it becomes a question of, are we going to participate and do we have a responsibility for what runs into the bay? I think we all want a clean environment, and I think we have a responsibility for that.
Mr. Rothschild.
The question isn't whether or not the climate is changing and sea levels are changing. They have always been changing. The question is whether or not they are changing in a way which is beyond normal cyclical norms. That's the question, and whether or not it is anthropogenic, which means caused by man. Now, this is the U.S. Senate Minority Report signed by 700 scientists submitted to the United States Senate. Several of these scientists were in the United Nations Climate Control, UNIPCC. I'm going to read some quotes from some of these climate scientists. I'm a skeptic. Global warming has become a new religion. Nobel Prize winner for physics, Iver Giaever. Here's another great quote. Warming fears are the worst scientific scandal in the history. When people come to know what the truth is, they will feel deceived by science and scientists. Japanese scientist Dr. Kiminori Ito, PhD in environmental chemistry. Another one. This is from U.S. government atmospheric scientist Stanley Goldberg of the Hurricane Research Division of NOAA. These are not exactly politicos. He says, quote, "It's a blatant lie put forth in the media that makes it seem there is only a fringe of scientists who don't buy into anthropogenic man-made global warming." This is being used to create fear because people that are feared will turn more control over to their government. Does anybody know what 1 to 3 millimeters of sea rise translates to in a century? I'm a former engineer. 1 to 3 millimeters translates to about 10 inches per century. 10 inches per century. You see, you can tell what government officials really believe by what they don't do. If O'Malley really believed that we were going to have catastrophic anthropogenic climate change, he would have taken some of the billions of dollars of increased spending he started and built seawalls. And so would Obama. But they haven't, because they really don't believe it. This is the rubric that is used to scare our children and our citizens into giving up more control over their lives. And it is bogus.
Mr. Schaefer?
What was the second half of the question about the county being contiguous?
Carroll County is non-contiguous with the bay, but what civic obligation do you see as Carroll County's responsibility?
In regards to rising sea level?
In regards to the bay. Well, okay, it says sea levels are rising, yes, and yes.
Well, Carroll County does not have any sea-facing land. We can't build a seawall for rising sea levels. We can't really have a civic responsibility for a rising sea level. There's nothing we can do about that. That's something that's going to have to be taken care of on our eastern shore and on the counties that are lining the Chesapeake Bay. There's nothing really we can do about rising sea level. When rising sea level comes, we're gone. Carroll County is going to be flooded, and we're all going to be having, and Frederick County is going to have some great oceanfront property.
I won't hold my breath.
I'm saying
That reminds me of the Superman movie.
We're gone. They got oceanfront property.
All right, Mr. Rothschild, what steps would you take to expand public transportation within Carroll County while keeping the cost of that transportation within the realm of possibility for low-income citizens?
Public transportation in Carroll County. I support limited transportation within the county for our senior citizens, our disabled, our students. I absolutely oppose inter-county transportation. I will not support any mass transit that leaves Carroll County and goes to Montgomery, Howard, or Baltimore, or whatnot. I'm not going to support it. We have empirical evidence. We understand the pernicious effect that it has on our communities, and I do not support any mass transit that leaves this county.
Mr. Schaefer.
I don't entirely understand what the CATS program is trying to do. They can't seem to make up their mind. Sometimes they have buses, sometimes they have little taxi cars, sometimes they have, I don't know, something that's in between. Sometimes they have something, there's a bus that drives around the county that says Trailblazer, so I'm not quite sure how that relates to, I can't quite figure out what the program is trying to do. We have a rural county. We don't really need mass transit. We don't have a need for any sort of metro-like system. There's nothing to connect us. There's nothing interconnected like that. When I was up in York, Pennsylvania, they had a rapid transit system that was pretty much like CATS, but it was for everybody. And it was a publicly available transport. Senior citizens could get discounts, students could get discounts. And it was a far more organized program, and I would rather see a program like that than what we have right now.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiller.
Well, I think what Commissioner Rothschild's alluding to also, a traffic study was done on CATS, and the findings were that it was best serving the community inside the county. There was no reason for it to go outside the county, nor would it be cost effective. The purpose of CATS, as I understand it, is to serve the elderly that may not be comfortable any longer driving their own vehicles. My mother, who's 90 years old, is still living in her home. When my dad passed away, she can no longer drive. He was her driver. So she loves to go places, but she's limited right now. If we have a public transportation system that works within the municipalities and can give our seniors some additional mobility, then there's a system in place for it, and that's the purpose of it. CATS is also used by some of our community college students to get back and forth to school. So it does very effectively handle that. Growing it any bigger is probably not reasonable, and certainly not to go out of the county.
Mr. Schaefer, I think I've got this right. What will you do to defend our gun rights if Annapolis tries to pass another gun bill?
I would support the Sheriff Department as they have been. I would keep the gun rights in with the people. We have a constitutional right to guns. I'm not going to take guns away from people. The only concern I would have is making sure that the weapons are being operated in a safe manner, that they're not malfunctioning, that I would make sure that there's firearms training. There's no reason to restrict weapons any more than we already have, and some of the restrictions we have gone a little too far.
Mrs. Spiller?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What will you do to defend our gun rights if Annapolis tries to pass another gun bill?
Yeah, we have processes and methods in order to fight legislation at the most grassroots level, petitions, things like that. It's difficult in Maryland because they are trying to take our gun rights away, and that's not something that the citizens of Carroll County want, and I believe they will fight. That is an instance where I believe there would be overwhelming public outcry to support that effort, unlike some other issues that the commissioners have taken it upon themselves to represent. So that is a critical issue, and I think that's one that a lot of Carroll County citizens would get behind, and we'd use all methods available to us to fight that.
Mr. Rothschild?
Well, I know a lot about this issue because I've led the fight on it. Separation of powers does not just go horizontally between legislative, executive, and judicial. It goes horizontally, federal, state, and local. And the Supreme Court has already ruled that federal government cannot commandeer local government resources. We have rights, but again, they will not enforce themselves. The Constitution will not enforce itself. It is incumbent upon local officials to act. When O'Malley passed his gun bill, I wrote the state's first Second Amendment preservation resolution. What did it do? It prohibited the use of any county resources for purposes of enforcing O'Malley's bill within our borders. Our sheriff signed on to it. Our state's attorney signed on to it. The newspaper mocked me, said I might as well shake my fist at the sky. Well, I've got news for you. If the sheriff won't arrest and the state's attorney won't prosecute, then we've nullified it. That's exactly what we've done. And I might add, in Nevada, just this week, the Bureau of Land Management gave back the cattle to that farmer when hundreds of deputies and militia members came to the defense of that citizen who was having his cattle taken by the BLM. So the point is this. You have to decide once you get into government what your role is. Is my role to fill potholes and repair roads? Certainly. But the oath I take is to defend your constitutional rights of life, liberty, and property. And that includes your Second Amendment protections, which say that your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I don't think it's ambiguous. I don't think I need anyone to interpret it for me. So when upper government infringes, it's incumbent on lower government to step in, interpose, and pass equal and opposing legislation or ordinances or resolutions to defend you. If we fail to act, then you will lose all of your rights. And when more officials across the state adopt this mentality, we're going to see a balance of power restored within America when local governments can begin working together to push back against egregious state and federal laws that are infringing on your constitutional liberties.
Thank you. Next question, Mrs. Miller. Actually, I have one question left, and then we're going to do a wrap-up, okay? Aging in place. What do you think of older people aging in place, and what would you do as a commissioner to encourage that idea?
I think it's a great idea, one that I may be embracing soon. And I'll look forward to that, very much so. I've seen my mom. She is so much more comfortable in her home, and as long as she can stay in her home, that's what she wants to do. And so predictable surroundings, very important. There are options that we could support. We had a homestead tax credit, and maybe it's time to give a tax credit for seniors who are trying to age in place and stay in their homes, to make sure that they're living on a fixed income will still allow them to be able to support living in their homes, because it becomes challenging when you are living on a fixed income, but all your other costs are going up. So I would definitely look at ways that we could support something to help them, because they're challenged with their real estate taxes and their other costs going up. When we had the cost of heating going up, I know my mom likes to be warm, so it was a challenge for her, but she was not going to turn down her thermostat. So there could be opportunities there for, I know they give credits on utility bills. We need to take care of our senior citizens. I'll be one day. I hope.
Mr. Rothschild.
Well, one of the issues we have with our schools is that our population is aging in place. We're having fewer children. That's why enrollment is down. One of the ways we can accommodate our senior citizens is through zoning districts that allow us to construct age 55 housing projects. And those are really nice, because when you build housing for senior citizens, you don't need to build a whole bunch of other services such as schools. And typically, I don't know too many that are causing a lot of trouble requiring us to add law enforcement officers either. So it tends to have a very low cost of services. And it tends to make a lot of sense for us from a development standpoint. But one of the most critical things with most senior citizens is the fact that they live on a fixed income. And that's what threatens their well-being. And I've had several people criticize me because I've lowered taxes 3 years in a row, but really we didn't lower tax. We did, but we didn't. The tax decreases that we gave our citizens were simply offsetting the many increases that the state put in place. In balance, I suspect most of you are paying more taxes than you were 4 or 5 years ago. But by giving these small decreases on your property tax, we've taken some of the edge off of things like the flush tax, the new gas tax, tolls. There's dozens of new taxes. I didn't write them all down, but suffice it to say this. If we want our elderly to stay here, we have to make sure that we don't tax them out of existence. And we also have to make sure that there's housing available to them. And that does make sense for Carroll County, because it doesn't cost a lot to maintain, because there are very few services associated with that. And then, of course, we need to have an adequate social service net so they have at least the minimum services they need as they get older. Hey, I'm an old guy. I'm 58 years old, so maybe I'll be in one soon, too. Hopefully not, but thank you.
If I may aside, Mr. Schaefer is not quite ready yet for the old people's.
Thankfully, yes, not quite yet. But no, I've had several elderly relatives who lived at home as long as they could, and then finally had to be placed into a facility. And quite frankly, the facilities in Carroll County are really subpar. Some of them are even thinly veiled scams. It's a bad situation, and even if you can't stay in your home, you need to be protected when you're in a facility. These facilities need to be inspected. They need to be kept up. They're really nothing more than a hospice where people just go to wait to die, and some of them rather quickly. And it's a horrible situation, and we need to do what we can to keep them in their homes, to take care of their tax burdens, because you're not using much in the way of services. There's not really a reason to tax you so incredibly that it's a burden. You have no income, and we need a push on the various social programs that we have.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to do a wrap up here. You have 2 minutes to wrap up, whatever you want to say, and we'll start with Mr. Rothschild.
I'm a Christian constitutional conservative. Needless to say, the liberal media doesn't like me. There's a saying, the dogs don't bark at parked cars, but liberals bark at me for a reason. It's because I move the conservative Republican agenda forward in Carroll County. But perhaps it is time for you to finally hear what conservatives are saying about your commissioner. Dan Bongino said, Commissioner Rothschild always comes armed with the facts. I hope I've demonstrated that to you this evening. Senator E.J. Pipkin said, we need more Republicans like Rich that are willing to play offense against bad liberal policies in Annapolis. The Institute on the Constitution said, quote, we see Rothschild as a public official who has taken his oath of office seriously and has the temerity to stand up in defense of the Constitution. Their comment was issued after I created the first nullification resolution declaring Carroll County to be Maryland's first Second Amendment sanctuary county. On the other hand, my opponent, who I have the highest level of respect for, Ms. Biller, is supported by labor unions. Why do they support her and not me? Because they know they cannot manipulate me. You see, too many Republicans are caving in under fire. I stopped pathways. We will soon exit the incinerator without paying the $3 million penalty, and I lowered county debt. I hold 2 degrees and understand the importance of education. I simply want our education dollars spent wisely. Less overhead means more money goes into the classrooms. The Maryland State Department of Education ranks Carroll 4th highest in Maryland in terms of education spending as a percentage of county wealth. Clearly something is wrong. We need to fix the Board of Education by putting in conservatives. From 2008 to 2018, enrollment in our schools will decline by more than 3,000 students. In the same period, county spending on education will increase nearly $60 million. That's $1,000 a year for every homeowner. Now, that would be acceptable if every classroom was filled, but when you have thousands of empty seats, it is not acceptable. You don't need a finance degree to see the problem. Enrollment's going down, spending's going up. My name is Richard Rothschild. I understand our taxpayers are not bottomless ATM machines, and I will continue to defend your freedoms if you choose to vote for me in the June 24th primary. You can visit me at richardrothschild.org. Thank you, and may God bless all of you in Carroll County.
Mr. Schaefer.
I would like to keep this county rural. I would like to keep it pretty much the way as it is. Our schools have been doing well. They might need funding in some areas, but for the most part, they're doing what needs to be done. Our technology programs have been geared towards assembly line manufacturing. We are not teaching the engineering skills that they need to be taught to grow, to progress farther. We removed many of the technology programs that we need to keep. I would want to protect your property. We don't need more commercial development. We need to keep our farms. We need to keep our rural characteristic that we have here. I would want to make sure that there's an increase in the minimum wage. I'd want to lower the taxes we have here. I want to just to make sure that you have the services you need. We need broadband internet in this county because all the businesses, all the corporations, that's what they want to interface with you with, and we don't have it. We can't engage in this new form of commerce that we have because we don't have the infrastructure. The infrastructure we do have is falling apart, and I would want to work to make sure that we have the services we need, that we have the wages you can earn so you can afford whatever comes out of this new commerce, and make sure that the schools teach the skills necessary for the jobs and bring in those jobs. That way we don't have our children growing up just to leave.
Thank you. Mrs. Biller.
Thank you. Well, what you see here tonight is you have 2 distinctly different styles and an approach. And you have to decide on June 24th because the primary election is everything. If you want someone who has worked for over 20 years in the community, is an open book, who's fully vested in the community as both a commercial property owner, a residential property owner, a business owner, and 4 generations of my family are here. My granddaughters are just entering the Carroll County public school system, and I could no longer sit by after 3.5 years and see the school system not funded. Because it's the biggest piece of our budget, Commissioner Rothschild thinks that that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. Local government has 3 purposes, and one of them is education. The other is economic development. The other is public safety. And we are at a crossroads. And we need someone who can work well with public safety, the volunteer emergency services, and support and continue to keep this a vibrant community that it is. So now it's time for you to decide. Who will you pick? Do you want 4 more years? Or do you want someone who's proven themselves in the community and driven for results and can work and represent your voice in local government? I don't downgrade the importance of the position of county commissioner to say it's to fill potholes. And I'll tell you, too, when your car hits a pothole, you will want it filled. So I've looked at, when I tried to make the decision to be county commissioner, to run for county commissioner, was not made lightly. And I looked at the roles and the responsibilities of the job, and I'm ready to fill it for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank the three of you very, very, very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Claudia.
And I want to personally thank the candidates for coming and giving such thoughtful responses to the questions. I know sometimes they're difficult, sometimes they're hard to interpret, but you did a good job, and I wish you all good fortune in the upcoming election. I also want to thank Carol for doing the monitoring this evening. She was our moderator and chief cook and bottle washer for getting through the night, and so I thank her for that. I thank the League of Women Voters and citizens who volunteered their time to serve as timers and collecting cards, question cards, and just general support for the poor old gals that are trying to put this on. I'm very grateful to the Community Media Center for their hard efforts, and it takes a huge amount of work to get this equipment ready and to get these online. They were streamed live tonight. They will also be available again on Channel 19. The first airing will be tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Additional broadcasts will be on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Friday, there will be a broadcast as well, and at 7:30. And so there are additional opportunities if people that you know would have liked to have been here tonight but were not able, family members, elderly folks, please have them tune into Channel 19 if it's possible. Forum is available on www.carrollmediacenter.org, and WTTR 1470 AM will also rebroadcast this. So Mount Airy has been very gracious in allowing us to come here. Carroll citizens, many of you saw a little card that said Vote 411. That is the League of Women Voters Voter's Guide. It has gone to an electronic system. The cost of printing is very expensive. If you go to vote411.org and you type your address in, every candidate that you are eligible to consider for that primary election or the election in the fall will come up, and they have had questions that they've entered their information in, and you can compare and contrast questions there. So I think you'll find it extremely useful, very easy to use. And I have to thank Carol and her husband because they are largely the responsible parties for Carroll County. So
It's after May 8th.
that's after May 8th.
It'll be online after May 8th.
Okay, so online after May 8th, before plenty of time to get ready for the primary. And with that, unless somebody has something else that they have a burning desire, I thank you all for giving up your evening, and I appreciate your coming, and vote on the 24th.